back. This is Arts Alive. I'm Lynda Phillippi. My guest is Sam Snoek-Brown. And Sam, I made his acquaintance at the Terroir Festival a few months ago. And he is a teacher, a professor of literature and writing at Pacific Northwest College of Art and at Chemeketa. So clearly you're quite a busy guy. Thank you very much for driving down for this.
Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate it. So why don't we dive right in, and you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I teach basic writing as well as creative writing, and then at the upper levels I start teaching some literature, have some novel courses, some story classes, things like that.
Fun.
This coming year I have on the books a course at PNCA in historical fiction, for example. And I'm going to be building a lot on some of the work I do in research for fiction through that class. So and then I'm a writer as well. So this is why I work with the creative writing at Chemeketa in particular. And this is how I bring the research to my writing and then share that with the students in the classroom.
Okay, so when obviously once they're past the sort of the basic English 101, whatever, and they get into the more advanced classes, then you can really kind of start to build on maybe some of your own background and knowledge and the things that you've done in your own work.
Yeah, I still do that at the basic level, just so I think it helps my students a lot to understand that I'm not just up there in front of the room telling them things, that I'm actually a working writer and that we're all in this together.
Okay, that's great.
So yeah, but definitely at, particularly in my creative writing classes, I just finished a semester at Chemeketa teaching a creative nonfiction class, and that was one of the things the students actually got into quite a bit with me in that class, was not just the writing part of it, but also the market research, the submissions process. I actually had them send things out. So.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably a much overlooked aspect of being a published writer is they're not going to come knocking on your door for it. You're going to have to go out there and beat the bushes, right?
Yeah, the traditional writing process that a lot of people teach is, creation, invention, and revision. You have to come up with the ideas, you have to draft it, and then you have to go over it. But I always add the fourth part into that of submission, because I feel like sending things out and getting rejected or getting accepted is just as much a part of the process as going through the drafting itself.
Yeah, you hear about the people that sent it out 47 times, and on the 48th time, just when they were ready to jump off the Vista Bridge, boom, it happens. Somebody calls. So how did it go for you when you were doing your own novel? Did you have to send it out a lot of times, or?
The novel is actually still out there. It's still making the rounds, so I'm still in the middle of that process.
Okay, so you can kind of relate to the open the vein and bleed.
Yes, yeah. In fact, I've brought in some acceptance letters for short stories, but also some of the rejections that I've gotten. I've brought those in and shared them with students in class. So.
Well, that's a very raw and real way to approach it.
Yeah, the first time I did that, one of the students said, "You're not making me feel any better about this. You're scaring me now." And I was like, "No, this is a good thing. You get the feedback, you soak it up, you go back to the work, and if it needs work, you fix it, and if it doesn't, you send it out again, because different readers for different work. You just keep at it."
And you wanted to say, "Honey, if I had the booker, I wouldn't be here."
Yeah.
Right? That's funny. So tell me a little bit about your novel. What's it about?
The novel is called Hag-Ridden. I'm assuming that will remain the title once it finally gets picked up somewhere. But it's a Civil War novel set in Southwest Louisiana.
Okay.
And instead of, a lot of Civil War novels deal with the war. They'll focus on various aspects of it in one way or another. But this one deals more with the repercussions of the war on the home front. So this is about two women sort of alone out in the bayou, out in the middle of nowhere in Louisiana. It's a mother and her daughter-in-law, and the son/husband has gone off to war, and they're left basically by themselves in pretty dire circumstances, and are trying to make ends meet through whatever acts of desperation they can come up with. And eventually, their neighbor deserts from the war, comes back into the bayou, lets them know that the son/husband is dead, and starts hitting on the younger girl, trying to make a life with her. And because he's deserted, his former officer comes into the marsh hunting him. And so basically the war comes to them in some respects. And that's kind of what the novel is about.
How did you come up with that idea?
several years ago, I was in a phase where I was watching a lot of samurai movies, those mid-century, Kurosawas and things like that. And I kept watching, a lot of them get turned into Westerns. So you have like the Seven Samurai becomes Magnificent Seven, you have Yojimbo becomes, a Western movie. And I started watching these and I realized all these samurai movies are dealing with the repercussions of the civil wars in the samurai era in Japan. And I was like, it would be so easy to convert these to a U.S. Civil War story, particularly the ones that deal with some of the backwaters of Japan where you do have a lot of marshland that seems similar to me to Louisiana. And I had, grown up with family in Louisiana. I've got some family who still live out in that part of the country.
In the bayou?
In the bayou, yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And so I had some familiarity with that, and the connection made sense to me. So I thought, well, I need to do this. I need to make a U.S. Civil War novel that bears some characteristics of these old samurai movies that I was loving so much.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah, so that's kind of where
So you traipsed down to Louisiana and wandered out into the swamp, and how did it go?
It went fantastic. I actually learned a lot of details that I had done quite a bit of book research and internet research before I was made the trip, as I was first drafting the novel, just picking up what I could. At the time, we were living overseas, and so I couldn't actually make a trip to Louisiana.
Oh, okay.
So I was doing as best I could with book research and web research, but I always knew I wanted to get down there. And when we got to Oregon and I applied for the Oregon Literary Fellowships, that was the thing I had in mind. Like, if I get this, that's what I'll use it for, is to make this research trip. And when I got one, I was able to go this past March and slog around in the marsh. So
the literary fellowship, is that the teaching position? Is that what?
No. The literary fellowship is based solely on creative work.
Okay.
So
it's like a grant.
it is kind of like a grant.
Okay.
Yes, it's very much like a grant. And so they give different numbers of them to different categories depending on who's applied and what they're giving out. But this year there were 10 altogether, 2 of them for fiction, and I got one of the fiction ones.
Wow.
So
Great.
yeah, it was. It was a huge boon.
So that's a big validator, isn't it? I mean,
Immensely so.
yes, I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
This is a good idea. Honey, hang in there.
It was good too. It was coming at a time where I wanted to go back to the book, and because it was still very much in rough draft form at the time, and I wanted to go back to it. And the deadline is in June. It's actually coming up next week for this next year's fellowship awards. And so at this time last year, I was thinking, well, I've got the summer coming up. I want to revise the novel. Now's as good a time as any. So it all kind of came together in a good way.
So what does your writing practice sort of look like?
It varies a bit depending on what time of year it is. When I'm teaching, I tend to focus on that more and squeeze in the writing when I have time. In the summers, I'm able to set a more consistent schedule and do the work, hours on end.
You don't teach in the summertime?
I haven't been, no.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I would, but circumstances being what they are, just there aren't classes all the time. And this particular summer, I happened to have off. Last summer, I had off. So
Actually, that's good.
it is fantastic.
Because otherwise, you probably wouldn't have just the block of time that you need.
Yeah. When I first wrote the first draft of this novel in particular, I was at a point where I was able to step away and spend some time just writing for a change. And that's when I sort of developed the habit that became necessary for writing a book of this scope, to actually sit in a chair for several hours at a time and just really pour the words onto the page.
Is it going to be like a big thick one, like Gone with the Wind?
It's actually fairly thin given the scale of the story it tells. It's about 65,000 words, which I think in print would be a little over 250 pages in that ballpark.
But already, the way you describe it, I can see the movie.
A couple of people have told me that, and I would love to see that happen. That'd be great. So.
Okay, so I think maybe the closest that I got to the swamp, which wasn't close at all, was Laura Plantation. You know where that is?
No,
down
where?
there. It's kind of down by Monroe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just, I couldn't see myself
Yeah,
in
that's
the
kind
swamp.
of classic, like, higher ground and the big cypress trees with the ball moss.
Yeah.
Southwest Louisiana is kind of a really distinct geographic region. It's all salt marshes primarily.
Okay.
And so the bayou is mostly waterways. You've got some reeds picking up, but if you're getting trees at all, it's up on the Shenrie. So the little ridges of land that get developed. They're almost like barriers against storm surges, except they're useless as barriers. The water just washes right over
So
them.
do people live on houseboats out there?
Not really. It's kind of dangerous to live on the water itself, between the gators and the snakes and the
Yeah.
mosquitoes. You really want to be on land somewhere. My aunt and uncle, who used to live in Johnson's Bayou down in that area, lived on like actual land closer to prairie
Okay.
style topography.
So is that sort of with the way you set your characters, do they have a home somewhat like that?
Yeah, they're actually a little deeper into the marsh, so they live in what's called like a canebrake or a reed bed, which is a place where the reeds have grown up so knotted that they start to collect the silt and build land almost like these little islands. And that's kind of where they live. The women in the book live in a little hut because their house was destroyed in a storm, and with the sun gone and no neighbors around, that was the best they could cobble together for themselves.
Well, it sounds like a good place to hide out if you want to hide out.
It is. That's exactly part of the reason I have them build a hut in the story, is that one of their means of survival is whenever a battle or a skirmish drifts anywhere near the bayou, they go out and pick up the stragglers and kill them and take their weapons and uniforms and whatever else and sell them back on the black market. That's how
Okay.
they make a living. And so having this reed hut that they've built, which is actually a real thing in the area, there's a native tribe that used to build what were called palmetto houses.
I've heard of those.
Yeah, and so they build this thing and it blends right into the marsh. You wouldn't know it was there. So that's one of the reasons I have them live in a structure
Wow.
like that.
Really indigenous, right down
Yes.
into it.
Yes.
Oh, how interesting. So how did it happen that you did not grow up actually in that kind of a situation yourself?
My own family lived in Texas primarily, and when I lived in that area, my grandparents, both sets of grandparents, lived in southeast Texas, which is right near the border. I mean, we were always, just an hour away from
Sure.
cousins and uncles and whatever. So that's how I didn't actually grow up in that area. But my uncle had, his place out in the bayou, and we would go out there and ride horses on his land, and
Oh, fun.
he would take us out on boat trips. and
Yeah.
one of the big family things to do when we went and visited is, there was a dead snake in the road, so we'd all climb into my grandfather's RV and head down to go see the dead snake in the road.
I had relatives in Arkansas. It was sort of like that.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
I know how that goes. So it really, what a rich tradition for you to draw from in terms of creating this fabulous story, and what a wonderful way to bring it into the classroom for your students, so it's almost like they can kind of watch you creating and watch the process that you go through.
That was a big help this past term in particular at PNCA. I was teaching a course. It was just a basic freshman course, but it was on research. It was writing and research. And I happened to be able to take this trip just because of timing and finances during spring break.
Perfect.
So they're off having fun, and I'm on this research trip. And when I came back, that was one of the first things I did, is I walked them through some of the things I did in the field, but also some of the text research that I did. I spent a lot of time in local libraries reading some of the local history texts that you wouldn't get anywhere else but a local parish library.
That's amazing.
And so I shared some of that process with them, the selection of what I was reading, why I was reading it. We talked a lot about evaluating the sources, which valid sources and what aren't really going to work that well, but you look at them anyway.
Sure.
So I was able to bring that back into the classroom the week after spring break, and I think it helped some of them anyway.
I would imagine it did. Sam, I really want to thank you for being here today, and I'm sorry that we're almost out of time. Please come back and keep us updated on how
I
the
would
novel's
love to,
going.
yeah.
For sure. Thanks.
Thank you.